Ridley.
Beg leave to ask the question standing in my name on the order paper.
My Lords, the Government is committed to a review of the Tobacco and Related Products Regulations 2016 by May 2021. There is very limited scope for amending these regulations in advance of the UK exiting the European Union. Therefore, the Government envisages a review taking place after the 29th of March 2019. Protecting the public's health will be the priority in any review.
My Lords, I thank my noble friend for that reply, but I'm a little bit disappointed. Given the strong evidence that vaping is much, much safer than smoking, that it's very effective at getting people off smoking, and that the strength of the vaping industry in this country is one of the main reasons why we're now the second lowest smoking country in Europe, and given that the government did promise some sensible deregulation in its tobacco control plan, does he share my regret that the EU's Tobacco Products Directive restricts advertising in particular, making it very hard for vaping companies in this country to bring to smokers the news of the health benefits that can come from that? So would he consider a public information campaign to bring the country's attention to what vaping can do, and perhaps also give clear advice to businesses and councils that they should not be treating vapers as smokers?
Well, the noble lord is quite right to highlight the benefits that come from vaping. It is considerably much safer than smoking. It is a very effective quitting aid, and there is no particular evidence that it actually encourages people to take up or indeed transition into smoking. The policy we have in this government is obviously taking place under the EU regulatory framework. We think that the policy we have is pragmatic and evidence-based. On the issue of advertising, direct advertising, as he knows, is banned, but the Department, Ofcom, the Advertising Standards Agency are looking at the current guidelines in this area. I should point out that the Public Health England includes positive messages about the relative benefits of vaping in its public health campaigns. So there is that message getting out. We do have to, in the end, beware of renormalising the act of smoking, even if it was with a different device, particularly for children. So there is a balance to be struck.
My Lords, lest Brexiteer noble lords get too excited, would the noble lord confirm that it was this government, British government, that pressed the EU for draconian regulations, and in fact the EU modified what Britain wanted? So, my Lord, we should beware repatriation of those regulations.
Well, I will only talk about what I know and what I know to be coming up, which is that we want to have a pragmatic and evidence-based approach. Other countries are looking at the balance we strike in this country between allowing smoking and vaping to take place, indeed positively encouraging it, and I think that we do take a sensible approach.
My Lords, the noble Viscount made a very good point. Well, of course, the same European legislation also brought in a ban on all small tobacco packs that had a devastating impact on particularly local and small shops. Will the noble Lord the Minister therefore commit to reversing the ban on small packs once we have left the European Union? And I declare my interest as set out in the Register.
I'm afraid I will have to disappoint the noble lord there. I think the broad approach that we've had on restricting advertising and sale of tobacco has been incredibly successful. We do have very low smoking rates in this country. They are falling all the time, and we have very ambitious goals to reduce smoking prevalence, including a long-term goal of reducing it to below 5% in adults, and I'm not convinced that what he's describing would help.
Can my noble friend explain to me why, as one who has given up smoking through vaping for the last 3.5 years, I have not had a cigarette, on the advertising point, I tried patches, I tried chewing gum, and I even went to a hypnotist. None of those worked. Can my noble friend tell me why those three things are allowed to be advertised and they don't work, whereas vaping, which does work, isn't?
Well, the noble lord is quite right. We are looking at these guidelines at the moment with Ofcom, the Advertising Standards Agency. There are limits to what we can do in regards to vaping under the current regulations. Obviously, we will have the opportunity to look again at this issue as we leave the European Union, and we can reconsider our own domestic legislation.
It's proved to be an effective way for many people giving up smoking tobacco.
But there are, of course, no inherent health benefits in actually taking up vaping if you're not already addicted to nicotine. So does the Noble Lord the Minister agree that we should be seeking regulations which allow the promotion of vaping solely as an alternative to smoking tobacco and not something which people not already addicted to nicotine should be encouraged to take up? And can he perhaps tell us when Public Health England will be publishing their report on e-cigarettes, which was due in 2017?
Well, I think the point that the Noble Lord is making here is that we do need a balanced approach. We do want to emphasise the relative health benefits, but we must also recognise that there are harmful effects that can come from nicotine in itself. And what we want, obviously, is to get to a position where people are not smoking, we're not taking nicotine at all because of the relative health benefits of the various ways that you can go about. And I do think the UK has a sensible approach at the moment. I don't have the date, I'm afraid, of that Public Health England report when it will be published, but I'll write to him with that information.
My Lord, as my noble friend Old Ridley said, vaping has been hugely successful in getting 2.8 million Brits off smoking tobacco, myself included. But snus has been even more successful in reducing tobacco use in Sweden, so that 5% of Swedes still smoke tobacco. That compares with 16% of Britons still smoking and 24% across the UK states. Given the success and safety of snus, why can't we use it in this country?
Well, I think that my noble friend is quite right to point out that vaping is a British success story as an anti-smoking aid, and it has made a huge contribution not just to noble lords, but to over around 2.5 million e-cigarette users, half of whom used to smoke. There is, of course, as he will no doubt be aware, a court challenge going on at the moment. It's under consideration by the CJEU. We expect a judgment in the summer of 2018, so I'm not in position, unfortunately, to comment until we have that judgment.
Could the Minister possibly encourage his colleagues to consider publishing a list of EU regulations which are there primarily because British lobbies, with the support of British ministers, have pushed them on to the EU. I'm thinking in particular of animal welfare as well as a lot of health and smoking regulations. It would help to educate opinion in this country as to what sort of regulations might be likely to diverge after we leave and which will not.
Yeah. Well, anyone who really wants to find out how many regulations there are provided by the EU can find those online, and that would be a wonderful way to spend a weekend, I'm sure. I'm just going to bother myself with the ones that have dedicated to the health area. We are, of course, looking at everything within that realm to make sure that when we leave the European Union, we end up with the best possible health regime that we can.